In this section, it's time to finally build the final application, so exactly the one that I've been showing you throughout the course. Now we already have the HTML and the CSS ready, and we actually wrote some JavaScript as well. However, in the real world, we usually don't build interactive applications with just pure JavaScript, because that's too much work and it's really just too complex. So instead, professional web developers use a front-end JavaScript library like React. And so that's exactly what we're going to do in this section. Now, as always, the first question is, what actually is React? Well, according to React's own definition, React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. And for now, let's focus on the words JavaScript and library. So, first of all, if React is a JavaScript library, that means that when we're writing React code, we're still actually going to be using JavaScript. So, behind the scenes, React is in fact JavaScript. The library is simply code that was written and shared by other developers, so to make it a lot faster and easier for us to build front-end web applications. So we're basically going to use some pre-written JavaScript functions and conventions in order to program our own application. And by the way, by user interface, we essentially mean the web page that's currently being displayed on the screen. So basically the current state of the DOM. Now, the React library has three main characteristics that make it quite easy to develop complex applications using React. First, it's based on components. Second, it's declarative. And third, it's driven by state. So let's take a look at them one by one. So first, component-based means that components are the building blocks of any React application. Now, in React, a component is simply a JavaScript function that contains a piece of the user interface. And a component actually contains both the content of that piece of UI, so basically some HTML, and also the functionality, so things like dynamic effects. Then, in order to build a complete and complex user interface, we simply combine many components into one application. Now, when we're building components, we do so in a declarative way. This means that we only describe what the UI should look like at any given moment, but not exactly how React should actually create that user interface. And we do so by using a special syntax called JSX, which you'll meet in one of the next lectures. Now, in practice, this means that in React, developers do never manipulate the DOM directly. So we do not do DOM manipulations in the way that we have just learned in the previous section. But now you might actually wonder, well, if we never manipulate the DOM, then how do we actually change and update the user interface? Well, that's where the concept of state comes into play. So React is entirely driven by state. And by state, I mean any data that the UI in a component is based on. And of course, all this will become a lot more clear when we actually use state and also components throughout this section. But anyway, what's so special about state in React is that whenever we update a state variable, React will automatically update the DOM for us. And this is actually a huge deal, because it takes a lot of work away from developers. So whenever we want to update the application that's visible on the screen, all we have to do is to update some state variable, and React will then automatically keep the user interface synchronized with that data. If we had to do that manually for the entire app, that would really be a lot of work, just like in this code that we wrote at the end of the previous section. So basically, what we were trying to do here with this code was to keep the data of whether the form should be visible or not synchronized with the form visibility and the button text. So that's what I mean when I say keeping data in sync with UI. So it's basically making sure that the user interface always represents the current information, so the current state. So as I mentioned before, keeping the UI synchronized with data is really hard and a lot of work in big applications if we only were to use pure JavaScript. And so that's the big reason why we need the help of a library in order to write complex front-end applications. Because front-end libraries like React solve this very difficult problem simply by taking all this hard work away from us, the developers. And React is of course only one of many front-end libraries that are available to developers. There's also Angular, Vue, Svelte, Solid, and many others. But React is actually the most popular and the most used one in the web industry. And so that is why I chose it for this course. Okay, so this is the number one reason why we need a library like React. But there is another one. So another extremely valuable thing that front-end libraries give us is the fact that they basically enforce a right way of structuring and writing code. So this way, everyone on a team writes application code in exactly the same way and follows the same conventions, which will lead to a lot less bugs. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about bugs here, it's just because in software development, a bug means an error in the code, so something not working correctly. And again, using something like React is a big help in avoiding situations like that. Alright, but that's enough talk. Let's go try this out with code over the next few lectures.